Hey, I'm back with part 2 on my little show on centers from the Gurdjieff point of view. Hopefully you watched part 1 and did the exercises or read the bits that I was reading, and you looked further into this of how to develop your centers. I found a lot of quotes in Views from the Real World, so I wanted to do quotes from there and carry on discussing our centers and how we're trying to develop them so that they're harmonious and all singing and all dancing in the awakened state, but not all sleepy. So from Views from the Real World, which is Gurdjieff talking to his people, he says, and this is in page 105, the essence of correct man's work is in the working together of the three centers, moving, emotional, and thinking. When all three work together and produce an action, this is the work of a man. There is 1,000 times more value even in polishing the floor as it should be done than in writing 25 books. Neither the thinking nor the emotional center can concentrate at all. And, this is like the old adage of, if you're doing the washing up, do the washing up. You're concentrating on washing up. You're eating your food, you're concentrating on eating your food. All these people that say we should be multitasking, personally, I think that's pretty wrong. We should be concentrating on what we're doing. Sometimes we have to multitask, but that's quite a lot of concentration being taken to do all that. To get things done properly with all centers being used and all feeling, thinking, and your instinctive centers working together, we need to be, fully harmonized and awake, and all centers working. So he's saying, memory, observation, sensation is nothing more than one center observing another. And that happens a lot. We think when we should be feeling, we're feeling when we should be thinking, and such like. It's quite weird that we do all that. Like, I'm suddenly concentrating on, my head looks a bit messy. But, I shouldn't be. I should be concentrating on doing this show and the information I'm trying to pass over to you. We should be thinking when we're thinking and feeling when we're feeling and moving when we're moving. But sometimes we need to do all three at the same time, which can be quite strange, because then our thinking tries to take over the emotional center, or the emotional center thinks it knows better than the thinking center and such like. Sometimes our bodies do things that we're not quite ready for. That's our centers not in tune. They're doing their own thing, working for themselves, and we're trying to get them to work harmoniously with us. Gurdjieff says on page 129 of my copy of Views from the Real World, only associations of a certain strength in one center evoke corresponding associations in another. The 4 centers are composed of matter, which is animate, but the matter of the formatory apparatus is inanimate. It is simply a machine. Every local stimulus in the centers, every association provokes associations in the formatory apparatus. Our instinctive center is the one that's helping us breathe. If we were concentrating on breathing, we'd probably stop breathing or screw up our breathing. We're not concentrating on our heart beating, it's just doing it. When we're walking, we're just walking because we know how to do it. It's an instinctive thing. But being aware of doing all that can also be quite a strange sensation. But like I say, when you try and start concentrating on your breathing, that can cause problems. But being aware of our bodies, that's why I think the sitting exercise that Gurdjieff talks about is very important. The sitting first thing in the morning, preferably as the sun's rising, and the tune in to your right leg, and then your left leg, and then your left arm, your right arm, your torso, your head, bit by bit, and being aware of what they are is a great way of starting the day and being aware of your body, and your mind and emotions are also working with that exercise. And he says, normal work, a manifestation of a man which implies all 3 centers taken together. That's the normal work. That's the real I working. And we're working abnormally in our everyday lives when our centers aren't working together, even though, we all think that we are, as they say, conscious, aware of what we're doing, but we're not, because we're asleep. To separate oneself from oneself does not require much strength. It means that the mind should stand apart from the essence. The mind depends on very few influences. And so with a little effort, it can be kept in the desired direction. And if you watch my first part on essences, remember me talking about how the mind, little thoughts come in to distract us, little demonic ideas and some remembrances of the past that you don't want to think about or whatever, these distractions. That's the mind coming in to do these naughty little, taking us away from doing the work. But we have to have control of that and be aware of that. We should be just letting it happen, like when you're meditating. If you meditate, you've probably been trained that you just let things go by, because when you're meditating, all these things come flying at you into your mind's eye, and we shouldn't attach ourselves to them. Just let it go. Just let it go by. But it's quite difficult because it prods us or it pricks at us, and we want to ponder on whatever it was that thought was doing to us. If it's an embarrassing moment of the past, we start cringing, or if it's something that we feel like we should have, had some vengeance on, we start thinking about that vengeance. It's very difficult to direct the mind away from them kind of things. But that's patterns and mechanical processes which we're trying to break by doing this work. We need to just let them go by when we're working on ourselves, or when it's the wrong time, when it comes up in unusual situations. We don't particularly need them then because we're working on something else. I know a lot of people that have trouble going to sleep at night because they have these kinds of thoughts coming into their heads. And that's when we should be able to say to our mind, I need to go to sleep now. I need to rest or recuperate. It has to stop. I can deal with this another time, or you're here to tempt and tease me away from doing my work. I'm aware of what you're doing. It's taking control, being aware. And he goes on to say, all this is because only one center is working, for instance, either mind or feeling. Yet you must learn to listen in a new way. The knowledge you've had up to today is the knowledge of one center, knowledge without understanding. Understanding is perception, not by one, but by not less than two centers. So understanding is bringing together all that knowledge and working at it with two different centers, which hopefully will work in harmony for you. And as I've said before, understanding leads to wisdom, and wisdom's what we're attaining to be. It's no good just having lots of knowledge and intelligence to use that knowledge. We need to develop it into wisdom, the ancient wisdom that will then help us develop to be an awakened person. So he reminds us on the next page, this is page 172, all our misfortunes are due to disorganized feeling. The whole realm of our feeling is filled with something alien and completely mechanical, which is what I was just saying. These thoughts come in mechanically and they're trying to get us to redo patterns of thought forms from before, because I don't know, it's like, when you have a channel, a TV channel that repeats the same programs for years and years and years, our mind's doing that to ourselves. It's trying to repeat things that happened in the past, and the past is in the past. You have to learn to deal with it, let it go, and live in the now. Now is what you're dealing with. What can you do about them situations now? Probably not a lot, because them situations are from the past. No point worrying about the future, because we don't know what the future holds. So if you're an awakened person, you might do. So we want to live in the now. Okay, the now's just gone, but keep living in the present. Be here now. Life is real only then when I am. It's bringing them all together so that we can work together and not one center trying to overtake the other center. And, this is all this disorganized feeling that Gurdjieff's talking about. We have disorganized feeling, disorganized thinking, and our bodies can be quite disorganized at times and don't do what we want them to do, or start doing things that we don't want them to do. But if we can organize our thoughts and our feelings, and, it's back to the old pondering of, why am I thinking that thing? Why am I feeling that way? Why am I letting a thought be affected emotionally by something that might not be helping me? It's hindering me. We don't want it to hinder us. We want things that are helpful to us. And doing this kind of work, this is kind of off topic a bit here, but doing this kind of work does help you develop how to deal with situations and things, and how to deal with you know, when these emotions or these feelings suddenly come at you that are a bit overwhelming. But that comes with doing the exercises that Gurdjieff talks about and looking at yourself. And, you know, I've done a whole load of shows about that you can go back and look through in the back catalogue on my channel, of all the different ways of dealing with, you know, negative thoughts, you know, and negative people and how to develop yourself and such like. You know, it's all our chemical transformation. This is what we're trying to do in this work. We can't do it in a negative way or to let our negative feelings or thoughts hinder us. We have to take a grip, make them organized. We don't want all this disorganization. We don't want chaos. We want harmony. And that's what we're trying to develop to become. You know, as Gurdjieff had in his institute, it was the Institute of the Harmonious Development of Man. And that's what we're trying to do. So in all centres, work goes on. There are thoughts and associations, but they do not reach the formatory apparatus and so are not manifested, because we let them become chaotic or go wild, or we think about it for a moment and then forget about it and don't deal with that working that we're trying to make happen. Because once we get it happening into our formatory process, it starts helping make the other centres work. So I'm trying to get all the centres working together. And he says, when you look with one centre, you're entirely under hallucination. When with two, you are half free. He's talking about how doing two helps with understanding. But if you look with three centres, you cannot be under hallucination at all. So when you're under all three centres, it's when you're awake and you can see clearly everything. You understand everything. You hear everything clearly. And it's something you can't really describe unless you experience it. Words cannot describe what that's like. An awakening, a real awakening. Some of us glimpse it just from a few seconds or a few minutes. If we could be like it all the time. Right, hold on. So we're going to go on to page 223 of Views from the Real World. So this is all still from Views from the Real World. Owing to the fact that the lack of connection in us between body, feeling and mind has not been recognised from childhood, the majority of people are so designed that there is no common language between one part and another. And, you know, I was saying earlier, or perhaps in the last show, that, you know, we are influenced by our peers and our upbringing. You know, they teach us, because they're asleep, they're teaching us to be asleep. You know, they're not awakened enough to show us how to be awakened. We need awakened teachers to show us the way. You know, thankfully we have people like Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Was Ouspensky awake? Debatable, but that's another story. Still a good person to read his books. So we're being taught to be asleep, to continue to sleep, and we don't want to be, we want to wake up. So we need to have a new kind of teaching, a new way of thinking, break all the programming of what we've learned from our past and start being the new version of ourselves. And he says, the power of changing oneself lies not in the mind, but in the body and feelings. Unfortunately, our body and feelings are so constituted that they don't care a jot about anything, so long as they are happy. The mind alone lives for tomorrow, but it is only the other two that can do. Now, isn't that interesting? Because the mind does. The mind's the one that's thinking about what to do for tomorrow. The mind's the one that's also thinking about what's in the past. So our emotions sometimes surprise us with sudden remembrances of the past and how we felt in things. But it's like we need to get our emotions in check, our instinctive body formatory functions in check, so that we can start working on ourselves. Otherwise, the mind kind of interferes. So it's coming back to the whole, what I was saying in part one of this show. If you watched the first one, hopefully you have, you know, got to think with our heart, do with our heart, be our heart, and desire to want to do this work. It's one of the most important things. You must want to do it. It's one of the biggest wishes. You wish to do this. This is not just a little, you've got to want to do it with all your desire, because then it can bring all them centers together to work together. And that all comes from the heart, desire. I've done a show about desire. I can't remember what it's called, probably Desire with Gurdjieff or something. But anyway, again, go through the back catalogue if you've not seen them. Because he's reminding us that an ordinary man is ruled now by the mind, now by the feeling, now by the body. Very often he obeys orders coming from the automatic apparatus. And that again is when, you know, something happens, we just fall back into old patterns. When we need to break them patterns and start doing things from a different, much better perspective of doing it for the betterment of ourselves and everybody else, obviously, but mainly for the divine. You know, like I was saying in part 1, this is holy work. We all want to be holy, holy, holy. And I explained all that in part 1, so I'm not going through that again. Though it's very important. So I've been lazy there. So we're working on ourselves. What did I just read? Right, so yeah, when we're asleep, throughout the day, we shuffle between one eye from another eye to a different eye, you know, got my work head eye on because I'm at work, or, you know, suddenly I see your friends and you've got your social head on. But when we're, you know, caught up in life that's not real, we flit from emotion to thinking, back to emotion, with all over the place. But when you're awake, you're aware of what you're doing, and you know, should I be thinking about this, or should I be using my emotions, or should this be a thought process, or should this be, you know, a heart process? And when you're more awake, you know which to do. You follow the right path. You know, this is why it's all right-hand path work that we're doing here. This is what we're attaining to be, righteous people. You know, I know that sounds quite egotistical, but we're trying to do righteous work, to work with the divine. Right, this is a long quote from Gurdjieff on page 262 of Views from the Real World. As a rule, at every moment in our life, only one centre works in us, either mind or feeling. Our feeling is of one kind when another centre is not looking on, when the ability to criticise is absent. One of the important things, we're criticising, our centres are criticising each other all the time, but are they criticising to help you or to hinder you? Anyway, continuing. By itself, a centre has no consciousness, no memory. It is a chunk of a particular kind of meat without salt, an organ, a certain combination of substances which merely possesses a special capacity of recording, a recording tape. It is completely mechanical. Our mind has no critical faculty in itself, no consciousness, nothing, and all the other centres are the same. What then is our consciousness, our memory, our critical faculty? It's very simple. It is when one centre specially watches another, when it sees and feels what is going on there, and seeing it, records it all within itself. We very seldom watch one centre from another, only sometimes, perhaps 1 minute a day. And I want to remind you all that every centre, so your moving centre, emotional centre, and intellectual centre, each of them centres has 3 centres in that. Your intellectual centre has an intellectual centre, an emotional centre, and a moving function in it. The emotional has the same, an intellectual, an emotional, and a functional part of it. And your formatory apparatus, the moving instinctive centre, also has an emotional, instinctive, intellectual centre. So each centre's got another 3 centres which are all working. So sometimes your thinking is coming from an emotional part of the intellectual centre, not necessarily the emotional centre itself. It gets quite complicated, but at the same time, we can start being attuned to our centres and being aware of what centre's doing what. I'm trying to think of an example, but my brain's gone a bit dead. My intellectual centre's not working. You know, sometimes we get too emotional about a certain thought. So is that the emotional centre part of the intellectual centre doing that? You know, these are things we have to ponder upon. And he says, it is possible for us to ensure a critical perception of new material if we take care that during perception on another centre should stand by and perceive this material from outside. This new method, when thought is already there, try to feel. When you feel something, try to direct your thoughts onto your feeling. In your garbage cans, you can have enough material to understand everything, but the place of understanding is quite empty. You know, and then garbage cans are our centres going a bit doolally and crazy and not doing what they should be doing and just creating rubbish and trash instead of creating good, high vibrational energies, you know, good harmonious vibrations to send out to the universe and to work on yourself so that you develop. And I'm actually going to finish this part with an all and everything quote. This is from page 1199 of All and Everything. Ready? All these three parts formed in him, which should, at the period of his responsible existence for pursuing a single aim, altogether represent his entire whole, begin, so to say, to live and to become fixed in their specific manifestations separately, one from another, never having been trained either to the requisite automatic reciprocal maintenance, reciprocal assistance, or to any, even though only approximate, reciprocal understanding. And thus, when afterwards concerted manifestations are required, these concerted manifestations do not appear. So all this working on ourselves, we need to do to break the mechanicality within us and instead become, in a way, spontaneous, but in a spontaneous way that we're thinking and feeling and being aware, because that is a different energy and a different way of being to being asleep. We don't want to be mechanical. We want to be awake and living. We want to be alive and aware with all our senses functioning so that we can see the real world. So thank you for watching. Till next time.